All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit with you guys and gals today about why there's confusion when it comes to the saturated fat in dairy and why this is such a confusing subject. Because again, when you look at the data itself, we know that saturated fat elevates LDL cholesterol. The data at this point is overwhelming that elevated LDL cholesterol is the cause of atherosclerosis. However, it isn't that straightforward in terms of where you get it in the foods and what is in the foods. So this is why it gets extremely confusing, as people will say, well, certain saturated fats, I've seen this and it found no correlation with this, and others find this enormous correlation with diabetes and heart disease. Why is this so confusing? Because it matters what food it's from. And I don't mean what food it originated as, but what food it is by the time it gets to your mouth. All right, and I think this is going to really blow people's minds when they think about it, because this has been studied, because researchers have noticed these conflicts. So they've actually done studies to where the researchers will take someone, track their diet, and then they're like, okay, so what happens if we add different forms of dairy with high amounts of saturated fat, but add the same amount of saturated fat? What happens to the person's blood work? And as a lot of you would suspect, just like with many other foods, highly refined foods that have been stripped of nutritional value, guess what happens? They produce different effects in the body than the food they originated as. Okay? Milk is a perfect example, because a couple of things have been noted. When it's studied, they found that when, say, skim milk versus whole milk, like zero fat milk versus full fat milk are drank, okay? Everyone's like, oh, so this is obviously going to be a problem, right? We're going to see some negative changes in the blood work from the whole milk, but we don't. All right? Now keep in mind, if we add that same amount of saturated fat or even fat content from steak or palm oil or something else, we see the LDL go up. It can go up very quickly and very dramatically. But when we add it from whole milk, the LDL doesn't really go up. Okay, well, that's interesting. The HDL tends to go up slightly. So you kind of look at a lot of it and go, it looks like when it's studied, whole milk itself is not correlated with cardiovascular disease. It's also not correlated with diabetes. In fact, some aspects of it are slightly cardioprotective. So this throws a little bit of a wrench in things. But everyone's like, it's saturated fat. It's really high in saturated fat. So why is leaving it in the skim milk not correlated with these things? But then we look at butter. Okay, and then lots of people, they make the mistake, well, butter is a natural. I get people who do that, and I always tell people butter is a terrible junk food. It's just really horrifically bad for you. All right, so what happens when the same researchers are like, well, what happens if we study butter compared to whole milk? Because clearly the milk fat itself doesn't seem to be a problem till you make it into butter. It is complete opposites when you measure the blood work. So what's been found in studies that have looked at that, where they take test subjects and have them drink whole milk, and add X amount of fat calories from whole milk versus X amount of fat calories from butter, what happens? Well, the whole milk produced the same effect it does in the other studies. No real significant negative change to the lipid profile. The butter shoots the LDL way up. All right. Now, this will throw people off because they're like, well, wait a minute. It's the same thing. How come it's the same saturated fat, right? This doesn't make sense. It's the same saturated fat. Butter comes from milk. It's just the milk fat. It's been a little bit refined, but it hasn't been just a little bit refined. You've stripped all the good stuff out. All right, some things that the researchers have noted. Some of the contents of milk are cardioprotective against the elevated LDL. Okay? As you might expect, a lot of healthy things in our diet can offset other negative things. So the whole milk appears to be neutral. All right. And they think the calcium content is really one of the big ones. Obviously, the protein and other stuff is all kind of a factor, but the large, robust amount of calcium and magnesium, secondly, but primarily calcium, because magnesium has been associated with improving lipid profiles, hasn't it? Well, we know the calcium content in it, in the milk, makes you actually excrete more of the saturated fat. Okay, it causes a higher fat excretion. Also, some of the things in there can increase the fat metabolism. All those things have been removed from the butter. Like all that stuff, those really beneficial things have been chopped out. Because the same thing when we go to yogurts, whole milk yogurts actually are cardioprotective. It looks like they almost have a slight benefit. They think that any negatives from the saturated fat that are in there seem to be offset by, again, the calcium, the cultures and everything, again, creating a healthier gut flora. All right. But the butter, it makes your LDL go up. It's putting you at risk of atherosclerosis and heart attack, even when the calories from it are matched. So again, this is a case of when we take a food and we refine it to the point to where we take all the good stuff out, the harmful stuff that's still in it, if that's what's left, creates a problem. Okay? It creates a problem. And that's exactly what happens there. And people get upset with that. They're like, butter's not an advanced process. Well, neither is table sugar. Okay, but look how bad for you table sugar is. Table sugar is centuries old technology. They were doing it hundreds of years ago. They were making it out of sugar cane, right? This is nothing new. This isn't old technology. Making alcohol is horrific for you. It's not a modern technology. This is stuff humans have been doing for thousands of years. Table sugar we've been making for hundreds. Okay, so you refine it to that point, it makes this horrible product. Well, butter is in that category. So the ironic thing is that, dairy itself is some of the highest saturated fat foods you can get, but it doesn't seem to, in its whole form, have the same negatives that the other saturated fats have. Because, if you were to consume even half of the saturated fat from, say, 2 glasses of whole milk, you get that same amount of saturated fat, even half of that from steak or beef, your lipids get worse. You get it from pork, your lipids get worse. You get it from palm oil. That's one that's pretty bad too. Your lipids get worse. But again, we look at that and go, well, that's a plant-based, but it's not a whole foods plant-based oil. It's a refined oil. You've stripped the fiber and the other stuff and all the phytonutrients and things that you're stripped out all the things that are protective and leaving the saturated fat. What do you think happens? It's very similar to butter. You're left with a refined saturated fat with all these protective vitamins and minerals and other things of value stripped out of it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.